Welcome to the deep dive. Ever wondered what really goes into making an IT audit effective, reliable?
It's a great question. There's a lot beneath the surface.
Yeah, and today we're kind of peeling back a layer. We're focusing on a really core part of the IT audit framework, or ITAF.
That's right. We're diving into General Standard 1008, which is all about criteria.
And also the guidelines that help put it into practice, right?
Yep.
General Guidelines 2008.
Exactly. Think of criteria as the benchmarks, the yardsticks auditors use.
Okay, so how do you know if the tech stuff is actually okay? You measure it against these criteria.
Precisely. And understanding these isn't just for auditors. It's vital for anyone impacted by these audits. Our mission today is basically to unpack what makes a good benchmark in IT auditing.
Making it clear how IT audit pros actually assess what matters in tech and information systems.
Couldn't have said it better. Without solid criteria, audits could just be, well, subjective.
Right, just someone's opinion. So let's start with the foundation. General Standard 1008. What's the main thrust?
The absolute core requirement is that IT auditors must select criteria to evaluate whatever the subject matter is. It's mandatory.
Okay, you have to have a benchmark. But not just any benchmark, I gather.
Definitely not. The standard is very specific about the qualities these criteria need. It's quite a list.
Oh, yeah. Lay it on us.
Okay, so criteria must be objective, complete, relevant, reliable, measurable, understandable.
Oh, okay. Slow down. Let's take those maybe one by one. Objective.
Objective means free from bias. Simple as that. So findings aren't skewed. The example given is using local law. Hard to argue with that being unbiased, usually.
Makes sense. What about complete?
Complete means they cover everything significant that could affect the audit's conclusion based on what you're trying to achieve in the audit. No big gaps.
Got it. And relevant. Seems obvious, but...
It is crucial. The criteria have to directly relate to the subject. If you're auditing data transactions, use criteria about data privacy, not, say, physical building security.
Right. Keep it focused.
Yeah.
Okay, next.
Reliable. This means different auditors in similar situations using the same criteria should be able to measure things consistently.
Ah, so it leads into the next one, measurable.
Exactly. You need to be able to actually assess the subject matter against the criterion consistently. The guidelines mention, like counting data transactions with unprotected personal info. That's concrete. You can measure that.
Okay, that clicks. Understandable.
Clear communication. Not open to wildly different interpretations by the people reading the report. Think legal terms with established court rulings. Less ambiguity there.
Right. And then there were a few more. Widely recognized.
Yeah, widely recognized means the people using the report accept the criteria as valid. They aren't immediately suspicious of your benchmark.
So it has buy-in and authoritative.
That means it comes from a credible source. Think professional bodies like ISACA, industry groups, government, regulators, established sources.
Okay, and the last one.
That they must be understood by or available to everyone reading or using the report. Transparency, no secret criteria. Everyone needs to know the basis of the audit.
Wow, okay, that's a comprehensive list. Objective, complete, relevant, reliable, measurable, understandable, widely recognized, authoritative, and available. That really sets a high bar.
It does. And it's what ensures the audit is robust and credible, not just fluff.
So that's the what's from Standard 1008. How do auditors actually do this? That brings us to the Guidelines 2008.
Exactly. The guidelines are the practical how-to. They help auditors select and use criteria effectively in the real world.
So what's the first thing the guidelines stress?
Well, they really hammer home the importance of carefully considering suitability. Do the criteria have all those attributes we just listed? And acceptability, will the report users accept them? And crucially, the source.
The source of the criteria, where do you start?
Often the most straightforward place is local laws and regulations. If there's a law dictating something, that's usually a mandatory criterion.
But tech moves fast. Laws don't always cover everything, right? Like specific IT processes.
Absolutely. The guidelines point that out. Things like change management or IT general controls might not have specific laws governing them. That's where selecting other suitable criteria becomes really important.
Are there other mandatory things besides laws?
Sometimes. Think industry-specific rules, like the payment card industry standards for handling credit cards, PCI DSS, that's mandatory if you're in that space. And data protection regs are almost always relevant now.
Even if the laws aren't super specific about how to do something.
Yes, even then. The criteria you choose still need to meet the audit objective, which might be demonstrating compliance with the spirit of the law, if not the letter in every detail.
Okay, and here's something I found interesting. The guidelines warn against auditors just using their own personal expectations.
Oh, definitely. That goes straight back to objective. You can't just say, well, I think passwords should be 20 characters long. You need to base it on a recognized standard or policy. No personal judgment calls as criteria.
Right, gut feelings are out. What about communicating the criteria?
Super important. If the criteria aren't common knowledge, or maybe they're a bit complex or open to interpretation, you must describe them clearly in the audit report.
Why is that so critical?
Fairness and understandability. Everyone reading that report needs to grasp what the benchmark was, exactly how the assessment was made. It builds trust.
And it all comes down to the auditor's professional judgment in the end, doesn't it? Picking the right criteria for a fair outcome.
It does. And they need to be vigilant. The guidelines even mention that sometimes management might suggest criteria that aren't quite up to snuff.
Ah, so the auditor might need to push back.
Potentially, yes. They have to ensure the chosen criteria really meet all those requirements, objective, reliable, measurable, and so on, to ensure the final opinion isn't misleading. Diligence is key.
Okay, let's dig into suitability a bit more. The guidelines use an example, right?
Yes, a good one. Local law stipulates that all personal information of clients should always remain private when conducting data transactions.
How does that illustrate suitability?
Well, they break it down. It's objective, based on law, complete, covers all client personal info and transactions, relevant, directly about data privacy, reliable, can be assessed consistently, measurable, you can find violations, and understandable. Privacy is a generally understood concept, especially legally defined.
Seeing it laid out like that really helps connect the attribute to a real-world criterion. Now, what about acceptability? How is that different from suitability?
Suitability is about the inherent quality of the criterion itself. Acceptability is about whether the users of the report will find it credible and agree it's a valid basis for the audit.
So the audience matters.
Immensely. If they don't accept your yardstick, they won't trust your measurement. Acceptability often comes down to availability. Can the users see and understand the criteria?
How do the guidelines categorize acceptable criteria?
They mention a few types. Recognized things that are so well established, nobody really questions them.
Okay, like what?
Could be long-standing industry practices, maybe. Then authoritative criteria, those from recognized bodies like ISACA, government agencies, etc., relevant to the topic.
Right, we mentioned those sources earlier.
Then publicly available criteria standards published by ISACA, IFAC, NIST, etc. Their public nature adds to their acceptability.
But what if an organization develops its own criteria for something specific? Can those be acceptable?
Yes, but with conditions. They need to be made available to all users, usually by describing them as assertions within the audit report itself. And importantly, those assertions must also meet all the suitability requirements.
So you have to be extra clear about internally developed benchmarks.
Exactly. And the guidelines make a useful distinction here. Externally accepted criteria, the recognized authoritative public ones, versus externally confirmed criteria.
Externally confirmed, what's that?
That's typically when criteria are developed by management for a specific audit. To avoid the perception of biased management marking their own homework, so to speak, it's recommended these criteria get validated by an independent third party.
Ah, like an extra check to make sure management's criteria are fair and objective.
Precisely. It adds credibility, especially if the report is for external stakeholders.
This leads nicely into the source of the criteria. The guidelines actually prioritize sources, don't they?
They do. It's a practical hierarchy. At the top, generally, are criteria established by ISACA itself. They're peer-reviewed, publicly available, widely recognized. Very strong source.
Makes sense. What's next?
Criteria from other expert bodies that use similar, rigorous, due process methods for development, still very credible.
Then laws and regulations.
Yes, but with a note of caution. While authoritative, laws can be complex, open to interpretation. Auditors usually need to translate legal requirements into specific testable assertions rather than just quoting the law. And auditors generally shouldn't be opining directly on legal compliance itself. That's often a legal determination.
Interesting nuance. What about less formal sources?
The guidelines mention criteria from entities that didn't follow due process, maybe internal policies developed without much review or input. Use these carefully. They might be relevant, but lack that external validation or rigor.
And the last category.
Criteria developed specifically for the audit. Often management assertions about their controls. These need the most scrutiny regarding suitability. Objective, measurable, etc., must be clearly stated in the report, and as we said, if management developed them, Getting external confirmation is best practice.
So it's a spectrum of reliability, really. Start with the strongest, most vetted sources if possible.
That's the ideal approach. And be prepared to provide more explanation and justification as you move towards sources that are less widely recognized or rigorously developed.
One last practical point from the guidelines: can criteria change during an audit?
Yes, that's acknowledged. Audits are dynamic. You might discover new information that makes an initial criterion irrelevant or reveals the need for a new criterion to properly meet the audit objective.
So there's some flexibility needed.
Flexibility, yes, but always maintaining the principles. Any changes need to be justified and still result in suitable and acceptable criteria for the final report.
Okay, so wrapping this all up, Standard 1008 sets the high bar for what criteria must be, and Guidelines 2008 provides the roadmap for how to select, evaluate, and use them effectively.
Exactly. They work hand in hand. Together, they ensure IT audits aren't just subjective reviews, but structured, objective assessments based on solid, defensible benchmarks.
It really underscores that these criteria are the absolute foundation. Get them wrong, or use weak ones, and the whole audit's value is questionable.
Precisely. Understanding these principles, whether you're an auditor, manage IT, or are on a board overseeing risk, gives you real insight into the quality and reliability of IT assurance work.
It definitely highlights the rigor involved. This has been super insightful, really getting into the nuts and bolts.
Glad we could cover it. It's fundamental stuff.
So here's a final thought for you, our listeners. Given how fast technology changes, how diverse it is, what do you see as the biggest challenges today in actually establishing and maintaining criteria that are relevant, suitable, and crucially, widely recognized across the IT landscape? Something to ponder.
A very relevant question for today's world.
Indeed. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.